Hello everybody, and thank you very much for coming along to today's webinar session, which I hope you will find very interesting and very informative. So today's title of the webinar is Workplace Substance Management, Why It Must Change and How to Change It. And we've got along with us today Trevor Hall, who is a UK registered expert witness in workplace substance management regarding policy writing, programme implementation and mediation. He's also a published author on the subject of workplace substance management and has written higher education courses on the subject covering qualification levels 4, 5, 6 and 7. And this session is aimed at either those managers who can directly influence substance management within the workplace, or those team members who can start a conversation, take the relevant questions to the manager and make sure compliance is met. Now, Trevor is currently working alongside Mark Jenkins, who's my predecessor, the past chair of the Offshore Group, on his next publication, and this is titled Workplace Substance Management, a Guide for Health and Safety Practitioners. We're fortunate to have Mark Jenkins along with us today to assist with the Q&A section of the presentation. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Trevor to the session and hand over to you. Thank you.
Hello everyone, hope you can hear me. Behind me, welcome to the TOX 247 HQ, by the way, and our boardroom. Behind me is two of the principals of the company, Gordon Angus, who is going to do one of the definitions you need to understand today, and Dr. Jonathan Ling, who's a Doctor of Psychology and Public Health. So we do bring a lot of varied experience to everyone. As the title suggests, I've been in the workplace now for coming up 54 years, and I've been dealing with drugs either by law enforcement, in the workplace, internationally, and it's all wrong. And so is my first book, and I read it a few months back, and I'm going to rewrite it because all of the language, or most of it, isn't quite correct. Too many companies are dealing with substance management as a healthcare provision, and they use healthcare language, which isn't right. Healthcare language has no part to play in corporate governance, the law, statutory law, T's and C's of employment, and an employee's legal duty to be fit for work. And there's other things that we've got to apply to it. So when I look at all of this historical language, we see things like point of care devices. Point of care being instant saliva, instant urine, or breath test, which is actually due diligence device testing for the workplace. I don't know where care comes from, a point of care. An employer wants to make sure that they're not breaking the law because they're culpable 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Departments like health and safety, HR, solicitors, everybody else, they're just responsible. They're not culpable in law. They're there to protect the officers of the company who have to comply with their own corporate governance. So I thought I would give you a quick brief outline of what corporate governance is. It's a series of practices, processes, procedures, and policies whereby the company runs its business and is allowed to make formal decisions regarding criminal and civil legislations, regarding T's and C's of employment, insurance obligations, and so much more. So this is where the workplace substance management program sits. It's actually in corporate governance. It doesn't belong to health and safety. It doesn't belong to HR. They don't get any training in this, formal training or formal qualifications. So at TOX 247 Limited, we do all of the analytics, policy writing, building, and in our academy, we've developed the only courses in the world with formal qualifications. And I'll come back to that later on. I also review, and I have reviewed in the last 28 years, over 4,000 corporate policies, substance management policies, or as they call it, substance misuse. And I've not found one legally defensible. First thing, misuse. You don't misuse illegal drugs, you simply use them. And that's got to be taken care of in any policy. When you look at then misuse, that's regarding legal substances. So the two have got very different meanings. Recreational drug use with regards to illegal drugs, it's a misnomer. It doesn't exist. The fact is, it's just illegal. End of story. When we look further back and we look at phrases used by healthcare, and they get, as we call it, a failed due diligence device test, they use phrases like presumptive positive. Well, you can presume as much as you like. You can't act on it, certainly not with the person who's got a full-time contract. You might find yourselves in court for an unfair dismissal or defamation of character. When you look at also non-negative, if you look at the dictionary, non-negative is negative or positive. And these devices, instant devices, test devices, do not do full-blown analysis. You don't even get a red line if it's a failed test, and that's all you get. So they're fine to be applied against contractors or people who failed the due diligence device protocols of a company. When it comes to full-time employees, you have sample analysis. An analysis is a full-blown analysis of finding metabolites, cross-reactivity compounds, drug by volume, how much it's being used, how often, and so much more that you need to have for a full-time employee. So we've designed the program of testing and analysis, and we'll send you information if you request it about why the two things are very different. Testing is unconfirmed toxicology. It's as simple as that. It's unconfirmed toxicology. It's simply a missing line if it's a failed device. If it's a negative, then you've got two lines. Back to laboratory analysis is confirmed toxicology. Confirmed toxicology is reported by a toxicology reporting officer who is an expert witness. Too many companies drift away to a medical review officer opinion. So they've downgraded expert witness testimony to an opinion of an MRO who knows nothing about illegal drugs with regard to toxicology, burdens of proof, evidence controls, and evidence continuity. It's quite a bizarre situation. So that's something else that needs to change. Even when we have a range of other testing applications, the MRO doesn't have a part to play. So at TOX 247, we've designed 3 categories of tests in the workplace, and there are only 3. Category 1, testing and analysis, is for illegal substances or legal substances used illegally. Category 2 is for the misuse, abuse, or disorder development of legal substances, or where people come into the workplace debilitated by legally prescribed medications, and they can't meet their legal duty to be fit for work. The third category is self-referral. Any employee can self-refer a problem to their employer. In the UK, they cannot be dismissed, so you have to manage. So I'd like to come back to category 1, because it's a breach of criminal legislation, statutory requirements, T's and C's of employment, etc. Category 1 is the only category where you can actually have a zero tolerance approach, because it's the officers of the company who are culpable within their corporate governance. Category 2 is also mandatory because you have to be seen to manage what is effectively a lower level self-referral on what might be a temporary situation of debilitating substance use, whether it be prescribed meds, over-the-counter meds, or a mixture of both. Category 3, again, as I said before, you can't be dismissed if you self-refer, therefore you have to be managed. So actually, the program of testing and analysis isn't optional in any workplace. It's a mandatory requirement to be managed one way or another. When we write policies, or when people write policies, and I review them, we have all sorts of legislations stuck in them. None of them are relevant. The Misuse of Drugs Act is basically about what the powers of the police are and powers of detention, powers of arrest. All you need in a policy is the fact you're not happy about people possessing, using, or trafficking illegal substances, because again, culpability within corporate governance will kick in. Health and safety legislations defer to a risk assessment regarding drugs and alcohol. I don't like the phrase drugs. Define the drug. Substances are illegal or legal. And that's the way to look at them, period. So when we see parts of the Health and Safety Act giving you legislations to comply with, they don't tell you what to do, how to build a workplace substance management program, what should be in it, who should be trained to what level with regard to it, what training is done on a repeat basis, i.e. requalification. If I go to court to give expert witness testimony, the first thing I ask of somebody who's written a policy is, what is your qualification to do that? When were you last trained to do that? And let's face it, around the world, there are no formal qualifications for what we do, which is a sample collection practitioner, a license to practice and accreditation, a program managing practitioner, which is where most managers sit, and that's a license to practice as a program management practitioner with regards to substance management, an executive leadership practitioner for those people who aspire to go into executive positions and need to know about their capabilities in corporate governance and in law. And then the master practitioner, who should be able to do everything no matter where they are. So these accreditations now exist, and you can find out more about them at a later time. When we come back to the workplace substance management program, I'm going to ask Dr. Ling to describe to you guys what the definition of a workplace substance management program is. Please, Jonathan.
Good afternoon, everybody. The TOC 24/7 Limited Substance Management Program, the WSMP, is a modular package of policies, practices, processes, and procedures trained and designed to protect corporate governance, policy, company officers and managers from criminal and civil legislation culpability that can negatively impact any collective ability to make formal decisions in defense of a liability to prosecution, meeting of insurance obligations, and protection of their employees in the execution of company duties, regardless of their position or their role.
Thanks, Jonathan. Where does that mention healthcare? It's all about liabilities, which have to be insured. In the UK, we have the Insurance Act of 2015, activated in 2016, where companies have to make fair presentation of risk. How can you manage risk if you haven't identified it? It doesn't say about the person being fit for work. They have a legal duty to be fit for work, period. So the workplace substance management program consists of a program implementation plan, or if you have a weak program, a program improvement plan, an EAP, which is a substance management employee assistance program, which is not a rehabilitation program. It's a program designed to assess a person's legal duty to meet their fitness for work. And if they can't meet that duty, it's a mechanism through corporate governance to remove them from the business within a time frame. So again, it's not a rehabilitation. It's a nice side effect if we can recover people and recover them quickly. But the average time for people with chronic substance issues is around about 4 years. The employer can't manage that period of time. After that, you've got the SAMP, the Substance and Alcohol Management Policy. It's not a misuse policy, it's a management policy. And it must set standards that, when breached, have consequences to those it identifies too. And it's as simple as that. I've read policies and criticized policies that have got 57 pages. That has to be defended in litigation. Best to look there, because if you've got acts and sections in there as well, you've got to defend every act and all of the sections. It's enough to say in a SAMP that the company is required to comply with civil and criminal legislations and statutory requirements. So that makes the SAMP actually universal anywhere in the world. And it's not compromising then the need for it to be defended with inappropriate material, which is generally general information, but unenforceable content. A SAMP must have enforceable content. The program of testing and analysis is part 3 of the whole WSMP. In fact, it's the 4th part. Lost track a little bit there. And I'm going to ask Gordon to come in a minute, because when we looked at toxicology, if you look in the dictionary, it doesn't properly describe what workplace toxicology actually is. And the toxicology revolves around evidence, burdens of proof, and other evidence continuities. Not chain of custody is what's used in healthcare. Chain of custody, I have no idea what that means. A chain, I can understand that part of it, but custody is the lawful detention of somebody who's been arrested. A donor is consenting to a sample collection. That's why we call our paperwork a sample collection consent form. It is documentary evidence contemporaneously documented in front of the person and then used further down the line by the program managing practitioner to be produced in an internal hearing or at litigation. And we've got other things in place to examine that continuity of evidence and burdens of proof. In fact, ask Gordon to come in to give you the definition of what we at Tox 247 call workplace toxicology.
Thank you, Trevor. So, definition of workplace toxicology is the use of confirmed and unconfirmed toxicological sample mediums within a structured program of testing and analysis. This is used to examine the adverse effects or ingestion of illegal and legal substances on an employee or contractor, which affects their legal duty to be fit for work, or contravenes criminal and civil legislations, corporate governance, or terms and conditions of employment. Thanks, Trevor.
That guy should make much more sense than a study of poisons, which is what's in the dictionary. We've got to start thinking about what we're doing in the workplace. Every sample collection is an investigation. It's an investigation into whether or not somebody is under the influence of something, whether it's illegal or legal, and how in the workplace we're going to manage it and guide managers to manage it. If that makes sense, you're already all 3/4 of the way to where we are. I talked earlier about burdens of proof. In the workplace, the standard burden of proof anywhere is in the balance of probability. The criminal burden of proof is generally beyond all reasonable doubt. And I see in too many policies that they are going to tell the police about what's happened regarding substance management. Well, that's great, but you've already moved your burden of proof from balance of probability straight up to the highest level for the criminal courts. And they've got a harder route to getting a proper conviction or a successful conviction. And they've compromised a lot of time in the workplace because the police don't understand your workplace. Only you understand your workplace. Therefore, keep all of your evidence in the balance of probability. There's a caveat to that. Testing, as we've already said, is unconfirmed and confirmed toxicology. It also covers narrow window and wide window sample collections. Not test mediums, they're sample collections or sample mediums. Test medium is just the instance stuff that I showed you earlier. When we come back to effectively how you gather that evidence, any employer needs to have the best evidence they can at the time to defend themselves should there be a challenge to their actions within the workplace substance management program. And a policy isn't the workplace substance management program, it's just 1/4 of a total workplace substance management program applied to every employer and every employee, no matter what the sector, no matter what the profession, they all have to comply. So consider where you are with your evidence controls. We teach our sample collection practitioners that their role is to manage the donor with dignity and go through a set process to gather evidence and maintain evidence continuity to the point where it's sent to a laboratory. The laboratory's role is to continue that continuity of evidence to deliver back a toxicology report form to the program management practitioner, who now uses that evidence of the sample collection or the toxicological evidence and the possible incident details to confront any donor who's been requested to supply a sample for whatever reason. So the program managing practitioner cannot be an independent person within the workplace because they're going to now manage evidence, the law, and everything else regarding that donor who will have probably failed a sample collection. If they're negative, they're negative. It's end of story. That's all negative is. But if there's another incident that's applied to it, the negative report is in the donor's favor, in fairness. So really, again, the program managing practitioner and sample collection practitioner are two separate roles, and they should not be conflicted. When you get back to the program managing practitioner taking it to the next level, the executive leadership practitioner, their position is to protect the company, to protect their own corporate governance, to make those formal decisions within corporate governance. And the formal decision making within corporate governance has got to be everything regarding the workplace substance management program. You can have mandated against you what the laws of the land say, and all of your country laws will be different. However, your basic principles of a workplace substance management program need to stay where they are, and then be flexible enough to be able to respond to a variety of legislations. So if I can come back a little bit now to the employee assistance program. Probably for you guys as the Institute of Safety and Health, you might think that the EAP is a bit harsh not to say it's a rehabilitation. The reality is the employer's got to be sure that that person is fit for purpose. If they're not fit for purpose, there's got to be a legal way to remove them from the workplace. That formal decision that can backfire on so many people. It can backfire with regards to the way people do testing or analysis. It can backfire by the way people interpret and use their substance and alcohol management policy. When it comes to the EAP, yes, we set the EAP as a recovery-oriented program, but it has to be structured. The structure of the TOX 247 EAP is that you are initially assessed. We look at any treatment history to make sure we have not been in long-term treatment for any substance management related issues. We look back as well to see what your declarations are, because one of the things we do need in our EAP is the honesty and integrity of the donor or the employee. We then have to take tandem, narrow and wide window back to laboratory samples to see where we are. The fact that they've gone back to laboratory means you have best evidence by which to make a formal decision within corporate governance. And if the sample comes back with cocktail substance use from crack cocaine all the way through to cannabis, amphetamines and a lot of other substances and cross-reactivity compounds, you're going to have a difficult time to try and recover that person within a time frame that the corporate governance would allow. And that's up to the individual companies to set that time limit. We see anywhere from 6 weeks to 3 months. So it depends on where you want to be as a company. During that assessment, once we get the toxicology report back, we don't give the donor the result. We discuss unmet needs at that point to make sure they're telling us the truth and we've got the full picture. And if they've lied to the person who's done the sample collection and they haven't declared all of their use or misuse if it's a legal substance, then their integrity is in question. They're not allowed into the EAP. The formal decision can be made. And all too often, we see most of the confrontations in the workplace around unfair dismissal. And it's easy to do that within a substance management program if you haven't had any formal training. Phase 2 of the EAP is effectively enrolling somebody into that intervention where the decision is going to be made as to whether or not they can stay with the company or be removed from it. So that needs a treatment profile, which is set with ourselves, the person's GP or some specialist providers. And we look at how we profile the treatment of that substance use. You don't recover cocaine the same as you do heroin, as LSD, ecstasy, or cannabis. They're all different. So the treatment profile has to be met. The treatment outcome is the last part of this, and the treatment outcome is effectively 4 decisions. Phased return to work while the treatment continues. A return to work in another position because the treatment still continues and they might be in a driving capacity and you can't allow them to drive a vehicle on the road because they're still titrating down or substance tapering from a heavy use of cocaine. If we allow them to continue to drive, knowing they're in the EAP program, the employer is culpable to aid and abet, counsel or procure offences of allowing drug driving. So we've got to be careful with regard to that. The next one is a return to their original position. The first two would need, if you like, a reasonable adjustment if there's one available. If there isn't one available, you can't make one. So it has to be managed. The last one, and the fourth decision on an employee assistance program, is a not fit for purpose. And it's sometimes the hardest one to make because you have to let them go. And there might be a myriad of reasons for that. They haven't attended treatment sessions. They've lied. In the retesting that we do and the reanalysis that we do, they've continued to fail or send back from a laboratory analysis higher readings. Therefore, they're not compliant. And as we said to begin with, these guys need to have complete integrity with their employers, the employers who want to help them. So the EAP, just like everything else in every sector of the WSMP, has to be risk assessed for what can go wrong, assess what happens if it all goes right, risk managed, what are the management strategies around failure, what are the management strategies around continuance, and then risk mitigated into law, insurance obligations, and terms and conditions of employment. When I look at terms and conditions of employment, the first lines you see are pay rates, holiday rates, all the things that are of a benefit. The first line of any terms and condition of employment is to point out that it is every employee's legal duty to be fit for work. The lack of that first line compromises a lot of decision making in big companies who don't know where to go or become badly advised by people who have got no formal training. And I can't keep going on too much about formal training and the need for it. Formal training is where you justify how you get to those formal decisions. When I've reviewed some policies written by solicitors, you would think that they would be as good as you can get. They've actually been quite illegal, and they've authorized dismissal for all the wrong reasons. They don't know toxicology, they don't know law, they don't know burdens of proof in this sense. They know burdens of proof in criminal or civil legislations, but not within a workplace substance management program. And it's the same, as was said, for HR, for occupational health, for teachers, for anybody. And when you set a standard within your policy around what the limits are for the company, they really should be parts of T's and C's of employment. And so when a company now builds this whole workplace substance management program, which I've briefly outlined to you, they have to go through a consultation period to discuss regional agreements with unions, anybody who's unsure about what their responsibilities are, who should be trained in what they should be trained in to be able to manage the corporate governance of the business. Now, if that makes sense, where do you go for that? Because without this knowledge, you can't make considered decisions. You can't make formal decisions around anything, really. So what I say to you guys, sector specific or profession specific, it makes no difference. Our training is profession specific or profession enhancing, as we call it. We can't make what we do a profession as the IOSH has, as HR has, as health and safety have. We have to be able to enhance professions with the ability or the capability to be either sample collection practitioners, program managing practitioners, master practitioners, and for executives, that executive leadership role. We must have this to give our industry credibility, because the credibility of unambiguous language is strong. The credibility of ambiguous language, which is what the industry is using at the moment from a healthcare overview, is causing conflict, confusion, and people don't know where they stand. They don't know what it is they're delivering to their employees. And let's face it, what's in society comes into the workplace. You can't get around that. As a corporate investigator years ago, we were infiltrated by a drugs gang who were shipping their drugs across the world through our shipping network, next day delivery free of charge. Well, as an employer, we're not very happy about that. So we had to have mechanisms to deal with it. And this is what you're going to have. When you come down to the pre-employment profile, how do you stop all of these problems coming into the workplace in the first place? The easiest way is to do a wide window pre-employment analysis, which gives you an historical overview of what that person's been doing. Are you receiving a high-risk employee into a high-risk environment or a low-risk environment? It makes no difference. To do a narrow window sample collection in pre-employment, which might be a pre-scheduled collection, they can abstain for a few days and beat the test and then go back to their original problem. And we see this a lot in our maritime part of the business, where they use blood, which is a 24-hour window of sample detection or drug detection. But they're not joining a vessel for 2 months, so they can actually go off piste altogether. And then when they join the vessel, they're already joining with a hidden problem or a hidden threat to the rest of the crew. Now you look at 100,000, 150,000 ton tankers, they've only got 35 staff. We don't need a whole bunch of people impaired, I don't like that word, under the influence, or otherwise having comorbidities of the need to have illegal drugs or a big stockpile of legal substance which they mix for alcohol. Lots and lots of problems. Effectively, the pre-employment element is where you're going to prevent most of your on-cost. You're eliminating micromanagement. We did a study in America with one of my previous employers, or they did it, and we found out that there was a 33% higher rate of absenteeism, 50% higher rate of people leaving the company, 70% plus of people who were using drugs were in the workplace. 40% of those were happily selling in the workplace because they have a captive audience. These are problems that are managed out of the business, which has got an on-cost, by doing a formal wide window pre-employment substance analysis. I've slowed down because I think that's important for you to take in. People can't abstain from heavy use of drugs for 90 days. They can for 2 or 3 days, which is where urine and saliva sit. When you have people in the workplace, when we just talked about the corporate governance, people go into drugs for different reasons. They go into a misuse and a disorder situation. I don't like addiction. It's a disorder regarding drugs that they've been dependent on. I'm dependent on heart medication and insulin because of my medical condition, but I don't have a disorder. Some people do develop disorders, so they've got to be managed and helped, not cast aside. You guys will have invested a lot of money into the training of these people, and some of them may have a few years service, some of them may have 20 or 30 years service. They have to be managed. So without that full workplace substance management program, which includes your pre-employment strategies, your employee extraction protocols, how can you manage them back into being a proactive member of not just the workplace, but in society as well? Yes, they need help, but an employer has to make a decision at some point whether or not his culpability is being compromised by that person's non-compliance with the company workplace substance management program. I'm mindful I've got 5 minutes left to get to this. The end of this before we do a more question and answer based situation. Evidence controls in an investigation are important. When you look at the program of testing and analysis and the documentation you guys use now, remember you cannot dismiss people on a point of care device, as you call it, as a due diligence device, that we call it, if they have a full-time contract with the company or even a part-time contract. If they have a contract with that company, please do not dismiss them out of hand. You must gather best evidence of a back to laboratory sample analysis. We often find people who fail due diligence devices pass a back to laboratory analysis. Where does that leave you? If you've already dismissed them and they've gone to a laboratory and got another sample prepared which shows they are negative, you're going to look a bit silly. Your company program's going to look a bit silly. And it could cost you a lot of money. So think about, if nothing else today, the type of evidence you're gathering, the type of kits you're using, whether they're due diligence device or sample analysis. Make sure that the burdens of proof that the sample collection practitioners gather are the best they can gather while you've got the donor with you. Once you dismiss them or let them go, you can't call them back in. You have no rights over them. But I can assure you, they will go off and seek best evidence in their own defense. And I think that's probably the biggest thing I can say to anyone who's engaging or activating a program of testing and analysis. Testing is one thing, unconfirmed toxicology. Analysis, confirmed toxicology. Let's just cover that off. Now, when we started this IOSH route map for you guys to listen to, we put 5 questions on the internet through LinkedIn. Believe it or not, all of those questions have now been answered for you. And if you go back to the LinkedIn link and look at those questions, you'll understand why we at TOX 247 are passionate about what we do. We've experienced it for a long time. I'm coming to the end of my working life, but we're starting to publish a lot of material, a lot of qualifications, stroke accreditations for the benefit of the workplace. Society's got its own problems, and we'll leave society to manage that. We manage the workplace. In the UK, we're looking at 40 million. In America, you're looking at over 200 million people. An employer can actually influence an employment culture and manage that culture when it comes to illegal or legal substance management. It's quite a big thing, and I wish governments would help employers a lot more with regard to the topic, but it seems to be a taboo topic. If you go to YouTube and type in TOX 247, you will see at the moment 16 2-minute videos explaining what we've talked about today. In the coming months, there'll be another 40 that will come out. If you look at our website, which has been relaunched and it will be out at the end of this week, you will see 16 ebooks, each with at least 12,000 words explaining bit by bit what I've explained today. We're writing full manuscripts for sample collectors and program managers, 78,000 words. Myself and Mark, as you know, we've already alluded to, are writing a book for the guidance of health and safety, because when they give people guidance on policy writing, it's poor. It's so thin, it's anorexic. We're writing ebooks and manuals about aviation, maritime, logistics, railways. All of these will be completed by the end of this year, and they'll all be for you guys out there to be able to go back to your companies and say, we've got a little bit more work to do here. And by all means, thank you, Paul. By all means, contact us direct for advice. Advice is free. If you want our services, I'll charge you because I'm a businessman. But advice is free, and we're going to help IOSH with a route to allow you to ask questions around this topic and for me to answer them for you. And Rachel might give you some more information about that later. But I've just been told you've had 43 minutes of me. So I think at this time I've said enough. I'm sure you've all got different questions for your professions or your sectors, makes no difference. I'm able now to answer any questions that are brought to the table.
Thank you, Trevor and Jonathan and Gordon. That was really informative. A lot crammed in there, so very well done. I've got a few questions that have come up from various sources. I'll start with one about culpability that you spoke of with company officers. Clearly, safety professionals, essentially, we manage risks in the workplace. And you mentioned at some length the culpability of the officers of the company. What sort of culpability are we talking there? What can happen to these guys?
Well, just like the workplace substance management program around illegal substances, it's zero tolerance in law, and it's zero tolerance in the workplace. So they're culpable in law. And if they're caught or do nothing, they can be proceeded against as the Act state. And it's very much the same with regards to health and safety. The health and safety executive set standards and that must be complied with, and effectively you can be prosecuted in civil and criminal law within health and safety. And as we all know, they've got a very, very good prosecution rate. I think, Mark, if I'm right, it's about 96% success rate in prosecution, because the theory is if you come to work, you should be able to go home from work uninjured, and you shouldn't be compromised by your activities in the workplace. Well, that's all well and good, and I applaud that. However, if the guys are turning up to work under the influence of illegal drugs or illegal substances, it's a harder thing to sort of say, well, you must comply with this and this and this. If their cognitive abilities are compromised because of medication or because of illegal substance use, their attitudes are poor, we've got to have a way to identify them and then manage that situation. When it comes to the illegality of it, as I said, the officers of the companies, I'm an employer, the three of us in this room here, we are officers of a company. We are culpable even when we are asleep if our business is running 24/7. We can't get away from that culpability because we have to build those policies, practices, processes, and procedures to prevent culpability. And that's what the whole workplace substance management program, as far as we're concerned, is designed to do. When it comes to the law of culpability, again, we're going to be looking at training, aren't we? Especially for health and safety guys. Have they done the harness stuff? Have they done the occupational health side of stuff? Where do they sit within the whole package of this? I think we sit across everything, and that's why nobody's quite sure who this program belongs to. For me, this program belongs totally with officers of the company, but parts of it, pre-employment and extraction from the business, is an HR role. The day-to-day management of the program sits firmly with health and safety and occupational health, but they need to be trained and they need to understand what it is they're responding to, because I've seen some really weird decisions made from occupational health and applying a clinical perspective to it. That's fine for the person who's got a clinical issue, but that doesn't, the employer, it compromises him by having to make decisions. Well, hang on a minute, I'm culpable here. The guy's got a clinical problem. I've now got to take action. Do I suspend him? Do I take his company car off him? What do we do? And there's got to be an outcome. So that's where that culpability sits, and the ability to manage the culpability.
Thanks, Trevor. Thanks. I suppose on that same theme, and you also went into great depth about policies, etc., and how they should be company specific and business bespoke, etc. There'll be colleagues on the call here who come from various regions around the world where legislation may be either one extreme or the other. To be honest, very lenient on drugs or very, very harsh on drugs. Does that feature in your policy creation?
Yes, it does. I think if you look at cut-offs, let's just say alcohol to begin with. In the UK, it's 35 micrograms of alcohol per 100 millilitres of breath. In Scotland, it's 22. The Netherlands and other parts of the world are 20, 21. Some are 12. The aviation industry is 9 if you're a cabin crew, air traffic controller, or a specified engineer. Companies can set their own alcohol cut-offs. But again, the alcohol cutoff is set within a set of formal decision-making strategies. Are you going to dismiss somebody for failing a breath test? Let's say they blow a 37, and 20 minutes later they blow a 35, so they're on the limit. Are you going to dismiss somebody for that? If they're taking heroin and they're injecting and breaking veins and bleeding everywhere in the workplace, that's an easier decision, isn't it? But yeah, the standards set within the policy can be varied. And that's why I think when we build what we call the policy package, you get a package about the company program, which is circulated as a communication to every employee and contractor. You have the policy itself, which is only 8 pages, but very succinct. But then you have your program administration manual, which is 37 pages, and a repository of each company's ability to be different, but stay within a basic SAMP, which is concise and accurate. So it's the program administration manual, the PAM, which is where companies can be flexible by country or even by sector, or whichever way they want to go with this, to make sure that they are protecting their culpability 24/7.
Thanks, Trevor. Thanks for that. Interesting question here. Clearly, most of the people on the call work in the offshore environment. And you know, for those who work in the shipping environment, for example, you know, how can they manage getting samples back to laboratories or deal with, you know, how is that issue managed in an offshore environment?
Yeah, it's very difficult because we've got another company called the Maritime Testing and Training Alliance with offices here in the UK and Piraeus in Greece. And I've just written an innovative unit to help people manage substances at sea. You cannot manage substances at sea the way you do ashore. A shore-based EAP can be protracted up to 3 months, as we've heard, or even longer, depends on what the employer wants to do. If you're on a vessel and they've got a legal duty to be fit for work, and if you just say maritime, you've got to be alcohol-free 4 hours before you come on shift. It doesn't mention anything about being drug-free. What do you do then if you use due diligence device testing on board a vessel with regards to how you manage that person thereafter? How do you then on board a vessel confine them to a cabin, take them out of the workplace when so many people can be taken out of the workplace to the point where the vessel becomes unsafe at sea? There's a lot of things, and I've written a module which we put into our maritime package, which is also for ship superintendents, ship senior officers and junior officers. I don't want to go into that in too much detail, but if in due course you go onto our website, you'll see a synopsis of that course with all of the learning materials that are there. So what we've done for the maritime industry, we've created a standard crew intervention, a standard vessel intervention, an enhanced crew intervention, and an enhanced vessel intervention to allow the ability of the maritime industry or the ship's captain, who's the whole crew are culpable at sea, to make formal decisions. Now, yes, you can't get back to laboratory analysis to see, but there are a lot of things you can do in crew rotation. Crews in our industry of maritime tend to be 4 months at sea or 4 months in contract, 2 months in rotation. So we manage it a lot more in depth in the rotation period. When we send them to sea, they take a full maritime tox box, which is a big box with every piece of equipment to do what they need to do. The problem with liquid samples is, if you're not going to be docking for a month or 6 weeks, they need to be refrigerated at the very least or frozen. Now that makes it a bit of a problem because you do get sample degradation. Dry samples like hair and nails, wide window, you can just leave in an envelope and post it when you've got to shore. You've then got to really fall back on regular due diligence testing to make sure the guy is clean. You've searched his cabin, you've interviewed him. What have we got here? What is the situation? Has he been compliant? Hopefully nobody will find that we've got an uncompliant crew member and throw him over the side. It's frowned upon, shall we say. So it really does have to be managed, and it's having that capability to manage it. So without going in depth into that, Mark, I think I would direct people to our website probably by next week, and that's synopsis of all the courses, SCP, PMP, Master, ELP, Maritime units, aviation units will be online.
Thanks, Trevor. You've spoken during your chat just there as well about due diligence device, sometimes called point of care devices or instant test devices, etc. I guess they're widely used by everybody on the call and the companies. What's the limitation of these things, Trevor? How many substances can they test for?
Well, the panels come in anywhere from 6 to 16. It depends what your supplier is. The fact is, they're inconclusive. We know from the pandemic that lateral flow tests weren't always accurate. I actually failed a lateral flow test and did a PCR test, and then I was clean. Now, these due diligence devices have got a high failure rate of false positives and negatives, probably sitting around about 40%. They are getting better, but they're not quite there yet. And in fairness, they are just an indication that something may or may not be in action. And to act on these with regard to full-time employees, it just isn't the way. If a guy's at sea, you've just got to keep using them to make sure they're still fit to be at sea. If they can't be fit to be at sea and they haven't told anybody where their stash is, and the ships are huge things, and they keep revisiting that stash, which is a rare thing in fairness, you've got a problem, haven't you? You've got to manage that situation. Easier ashore, much easier ashore, because you can take people out, you can do whatever you need to do within those three categories of testing and analysis.
Okay, thanks for that, Trevor. Another one which I'm sure you've been asked before. You know, what are your views on random testing?
Yeah, random testing using an imprecise device in a dip sample of 1,000 employees. Best to look there. If you're going to test, I'm a great believer in testing for the right reasons. Some people call it a deterrent, random testing. Your deterrent is a strong and robust workplace substance management program. People will try and obstruct tests in a great many ways. That means they're obstructing an internal investigation. Therefore, you fall back to your, if you like, your disciplinary procedure and revert to gross misconduct. I see too many people in policy saying, if you refuse a DDD test, we'll treat it as a failed test. You can't treat it a non-taking of a test as a positive test. It's ridiculous. So due diligence devices are what they are. They're a starting process. If somebody, let's say, fails a due diligence device on opiate, question is, have they got a prescription? If they haven't got a prescription, then they're illegally in possession of or using an opiate, which is a Class B drug of prescription. So you move straight away to the illegal element. So there's countermeasures which we train, there's countermeasures which are available, and we'll be happy to guide people through that if they make requests of us.
Thanks, Trevor. That's a robust answer. One other one here about fines, etc. So if you're cleaning a cabin or working in an environment and you find something suspicious, does your training kind of cover how to deal with that? Or because obviously on TV you see people stick their fingers in things and taste it, etc., which is obviously to be avoided.
Yeah. Well, for the benefit of the people listening, I was an undercover drug buyer for many years, and I never stuck my finger in a kilo of coke to see what it was. You don't do that. Well, as you know, Mark, in one of the chapters in our book is how to build an incident report file, an IRF, and how to preserve evidence, what you should do under certain circumstances. We've had this on many occasions where people are touching and handling evidence. So we've got a package now to train people about forensic evidence in the workplace. Bear in mind, we don't want to always take this to the police, because the police are always going to only deal with the actual criminal act. So the balance of probability is a dispute between people or organizations. Beyond all reasonable doubt is the breaking of a law. So evidence sits clearly between the two, and it's a question of where you want to be with that. If you've compromised evidence in the balance of probability, you can probably still manage that in a different way. As soon as you go back to beyond all reasonable doubt and that evidence is compromised, it becomes inadmissible. So these are the things that will come out in our book and some of the other training courses that we do provide into the environment.
Okay, thanks for that, Trevor. And last question from me, it comes from Stephen, who's on the call. In respect of sample taking, etc., what is your view of having corroboration, and when should it be ensured?
Yeah, I think same sex. In our, I don't know if people can see this. This is our sample collection consent form. It covers due diligence device testing and back to laboratory analysis. And it's a contemporaneous record, an evidential record of the whole process. If you think you've got somebody who is going to be straightforward, and you never think that, because one of the things we do say is always be ready for the unexpected. While people are learning how to be sample collection practitioners, we advise them to do it together. Companies need more than one sample collection practitioner. So always work in pairs. You must always offer the donor the option of a witness. And I'm not talking about Uncle Dave who lives 50 miles away. I'm talking about somebody in the workplace who's not connected with the incident. So you must offer them that, and you must endorse our sample collection consent form to that effect. You must have like for like sex, if you will, for urine samples. I wouldn't do, I wouldn't do a urine sample on a female. I wouldn't expect a female to do it on me. But with saliva collection, everybody's present in the room. You can have 20 people in a room all doing a saliva sample at the same time, as long as they sign to say they're happy for everybody to witness everybody's sample. Therefore, you get through all that in about half an hour. With a urine sample, 3 hours to allow them to pass urine. Then they've got to be monitored. You can do them one at a time, toilet SOP, to make sure you've got lube blue and everything's taped off. Bit messy.
Okay, thanks for that, Trevor, and thanks again, Gordon and Jonathan. And on that, I will now pass you back to Rachel.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you very much for today's session, Trevor, and your colleagues, Jonathan and Gordon there, and Mark. Great work with the Q&A set there, so brilliant work on there. Some interesting points raised, so I hope it has given today's audience some food for thought. And on that note, following this today's session, the webinar, we're going to follow it up, date yet to be determined, but we're going to follow it up with a roundtable conversation style session. So the questions that Trevor spoke about that we published on the LinkedIn articles advertising this session, have a think of those, read those questions, have a look at the material that Trevor's spoken about, and come to one of these question and answer sessions and engage with us, and it'll give you a chance kind of in a smaller group to ask Trevor and his colleagues a bit more about what exactly is entailed. So I just want to thank everybody for coming along today, and hope it's been of benefit to you all, and wish you all a good rest of your day. Take care. Thanks, folks.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, folks.